Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. It's been another long absence from doing these videos. For that I apologise. So let's get cracking with this Majorette Peugeot 405 T16. So with what only seems like 5 minutes, over 12 months has passed by before I did a last video. So for that I do apologise. It's not through the want of not wanting to do them, just life takes over. I've been beavering away in the background on different scales, some slot car stuff, larger die casts, some old plastic 1/24. It's just that I've never got around to doing any videos. So here we are, we're back on it again. This is a nice little Majorette 405 T16 from the 90s, around about the 90s. The car that actually raced was back in the 80s, the Pikes Peaks, with the big Evo version of it. Before that, it was the Rally Raids, the African rallies. Ari Vatland drove it. That alongside the 205 T16. So looking at this little model, again, it always amazes me what is the potential underneath there once you sort of overlook the, I won't say bland livery that they put on these things. There's obviously branding issues and licensing issues. The toys at the end of the day after that, so they're only a couple of quid here and there to buy, so they're not going to spend a fortune on having, well, essentially cigarette advertising. A lot of them were back then, like the Camels and the Marlboro and whatnot. But when you sort of overlook that, there's some nice little details I can see coming through underneath. So with that, it's time to take the chassis away from the body itself by just drilling past that rivet. And I've done a video series on that in the past, so I won't go into too much detail, but you get a rough overview of what I've done there. Separating them two is always the first exciting part of it, and just seeing what's actually underneath there. I love this old Majorette way, well, they still do it actually, of doing a little spring steel inside, so it's a lovely little suspension. It's got a nice little feel to it. I can remember playing with them as a kid, and they were more realistic than the Matchbox and the Hot Wheels because they had something of what replicated real suspension. Inside, lovely little details again, which is often hidden away. A little roll bar, bucket seats with some harness details you can see in there. Previous to that, there was a little bit of a basic engine detail with what was there. But as you can see, all in all, it's not a bad little casting. Some lovely little details that I will start bringing out of the shadows, if you like, and I'll drill through and open up some of these apertures. But first of all, it's time just to take away the paint. Again, I've done a video on this, what methods I use, and there's no hard and fast way of doing this. Some people like to do it quite quickly and they use some volatile chemicals. I'm quite happy just to leave it soaking away in the background over a couple of hours or even a day or two, to be honest. So very cheap paint stripper that I buy from the hardware store in the UK, B&Q, their own branded stuff. Falls off really easy. It's not that smelly. Obviously you want to put stuff on your hands and be careful of how you get rid of the actual residue of this afterwards, but as you can see, it comes off literally as easy as melting chocolate, if you like. It just drips off and it leaves a really nice surface underneath with not much more preparation you want to do afterwards by scraping away any excess paint. But as you can see, comes out rather nice, and that's with no further abrasives or anything on that. But what I like to do often, as the case with these, is I will use a little bit of wire wool and just try and buff out any more imperfections, if you like. Not so I'm going too overboard at this stage, just to see if there is any other areas that may need some rectification on it, some filling in, or any other filing away, because what it will do, it will often bring up some of the mold lines, some of the casting lines, should I say. But as you can see, just in the side there by the door and by that rear arch, there's some little imperfections in the casting. I don't think it's damage from being plane worn or anything. I think it's just a little bit of damage within the casting when it was made itself, and the paint's just filled it in. But this little bit of buffering away will bring that out, so I'll address that in a minute. But just to bring out them details I mentioned earlier on the bonnet, it's got some air scoops. The engine was actually in the rear of this vehicle, so at the front there was some, I believe, radiators intercooling, some sort of cooling for the vehicle in the front. So there's some of these scoops here. It's rather close to where it's mounted at the front. This is one of them castings where it sort of links in at the back, and then at the front it'll have that rivet post, which I will tap and drill later on. But all I'm doing here now is I'm trying to be careful not to destroy that post, and it's quite chunky in the casting underneath. But all I'm doing is just drill that hole with this. Sometimes they're called coping saws, sometimes the jewelry saws. You can find them on Amazon. Literally just thread the blade through. They are very, very, very brittle, and you've got to take care. But if you just tickle along and take your time, you can cut through it rather easily, just enough so you can then get a file or some other method of getting in there and just cleaning out them apertures that you've just cut. And what it will do is it'll just lift them details just that little bit more. Again, along the side, I'm doing the same again. It adds some little air intakes down the side of both rear quarters. Just marked it out with a pencil somewhere. I've got a bit of a guide to go off. And again, just taking my time, this little vice drill to open it up, and then at the side again, using the blade. I can't get the saw in there, it's just too tight, but very monotonous. Does take a little bit of effort, so you do take a little bit of patience. Just again, tickle along with that saw blade enough to get rid of that material, and you can get a file in there and open it up and just reveal a little bit more detail. So now I can just see some of these areas where there is some lines from the casting, which I'm just flattening out and going around it all with some putty just to fill in some of these imperfections. On the camera you can't quite see how many there are, but once you've got it in your hand in front of you, there is quite a few here and there. But again, these are only a couple of quid toys. It's quite remarkable how they can knock them out still in this day and age for the price that they do, really, given all the costs on manufacturing all around the world and raw materials. So I'll put that to one side for the moment, and I'll concentrate a little bit on the interiors now. A little bit of detail there again. Moulded into the rear, it has got some of them rear apertures again, which I'll address in a moment. But just putting it all together, trying to have a quick look and see if there's any areas of them holes that have opened that would make what's behind it look a little ugly and bare. And all looks good. So I'm going to take this time now on this rear bumper. As I say, it makes sense, and it's a shame not to open up these areas. Again, just by using a little bit of care and patience. The plastic is really soft, so it took an age to do this bit, just a little bit of time, not to go too far and break things as I was going along is probably my main aim here, but you can literally take off too much, so it's just quite a monotonous time just to go along and just shave away little bits as you go along. And as you can see, it opens it up rather nicely at the back. Just gives it a little bit more depth. Not going too overboard. If anything, with this new video coming back, I'm taking material away rather than adding anything. So everything is pretty much there on these little cars, these little old toys. But with that said, I always like to add a little bit of styrene, so I'm just going to build on that roll bar a little bit, what is already in the rear of this vehicle, and just push it through to the interior cockpit area. And very, very basic this is, with 1mm styrene rod. Just open up a hole. You've got enough material in the little moulding already, just enough to slide a little piece in, which I'll glue in situ when I've done. Just mark out where I want to create that bend, and with a little care, with it being such a thin piece of material, just a few seconds, just enough to get the piece to melt, just a little bit of heat underneath, and as simple and as quick as that, you can start forming up a very small roll cage. It just adds that little piece of added detail to the finished car. I added a little bit more just to that rear engine bay there, as you saw. Just some extra pipe work, just to again add a bit more depth to it. And I'll just do another quick dry fit, just to make sure none of these very minor additions are going to foul anything. You'd be surprised at how many times over the years I've done these things and I've come to put them together, and yeah, some of the basic areas of modelling, and I just completely overlooked it. But I might even do a series on that, of all these little cock-ups I've made along the way. There's some quite alarming ones, but here we go. So just putting them all together, and a quick spray of primer, and already it's starting to look a little bit more scale realistic. And with that realism, the closest wheels I can find that'll fit this vehicle, I don't actually know who made these ones. I bought these ones in bulk off Shapeways, or Shapeways as was at the time. I believe it's no longer the same company anymore. But really easy to fit wheels and axles to these Majorettes. It's simply removing them from this little spring retainer. No cutting away with pliers or any fancy drilling here and there, and it's a very simple process of selecting the wheels and tyres you want, getting the, as I've used in this particular car, just some brass rod as the axle, simply putting them all together, gluing them. I do often open up the rear of the wheels just to fit these rods, because sometimes it can be a little bit tight, and if you put too much pressure they will crack and come through the other side. So I'll just open them up a little bit just to help it along the way, and it gives it a little bit more space in there just to dab whatever glue you want to use. Sometimes I use some blue tack, and I'll just put a little bit of blue tack in there just to sort of do a dry fit of the axles, if you like, and then afterwards I'll put some glue in to harden it all up, and it seems to do the job. But here we have, as I'm fully aware, I've got Firestone tyres on a Michelin branded car, but hey, when needs must. I'm just sort of seeing how it all goes together and rolls along before I do start putting any glue or any other finishing touches here and there. And at this stage, I always like the look of the cars when they're primed up in this state. I think just with the shadows and the lighting, it really brings out all the details. It's not complicated with any colours or livery or anything else to distract your eyes, and I think they look rather good. Windscreen assembly in this is pretty much okay. Just needs a little buffing here and there, just to get rid of some of them scratchings, which is really easy to do. Just some rather high grit sandpaper, and then just to get the scratches out, and then I'll dip it in some gloss coat. And now to the livery. I did a little series on this on Instagram, and people were saying to go with the camel. I don't actually like the camel ones, and the reasons being is there's just so many bad ones I've seen over the years. The toys, they look rather cheap. So for me, it's always the OE Peugeot colours and the Pioneer that I've really loved. And I do love some of these retro old liveries. I keep meaning to do a whole series on some cars and just fantasy liveries, and put some modern cars with the old liveries and vice versa, some old cars with modern liveries. But I do love this Peugeot theme, and again, I've done a video on this if you want to look through some of the back catalogues of videos I've got on how I produce the decals, however you want to pronounce it. I say decals. And it's very straightforward. I'll just take some side profile shots of the vehicle. I get a reference photo, and then I'll just get some of the branding, start putting it in place, and then with everything else I'll just start drawing the patterns, any other additional parts of the livery that needs to be done. Once I've printed it, this is probably one of my favourite parts of the build, is starting to piece all the liveries together. I just love race cars in general, especially tin tops. And this is the bit that I don't care if it takes me a few hours or a day or so. I just enjoy this process of starting to build it all up. Really easy one to do this, with it being just a base white colour. Easy to apply. And it makes the colours nice and vibrant and pops up rather well on this one. So just finishing off with a little bit of paint detail here and there, and I use different types of paint for this. Always use acrylics, but different brands of paint, should I say. These AK 3rd generation paints, I use these more often than most, because they're just so good. They got great coverage, first coat every time, great selection. That said, my youngest son now is into all Warhammer, so I've started using some of these Citadel paints from them, and they are equally, if not better as well. Great coverage, super good range of colours, especially some of these silvers. And again, I don't always use the Tamiya stuff. I've got a lot of them, but again, well worth using it at this stage as well. They do take a bit of mixing from experience, but the other two, absolutely fabulous, the AK Weathering and the Citadel ones. So let's just remind ourselves what it originally looked like. It's a nice and easy one to get back into this. Again, looks rather, well, it is a toy, but rather toy looking with all that generic branding on. And now for a more race replica rally raid version, this new Peugeot 405 Turbo 16. I am going to start doing more videos again now. I say that every time, but this time it is a promise, and I've got some nice little ones up my sleeve, some slot cars, some larger die-cast, some old renovations of some old plastic kits. But for now, breaking myself back into it nice and easy is this Majorette. So I hope you all like it. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Until the next time, thank you for watching.